All right, we're going to get going. Welcome everybody to our March Pathways to Adult Success Solution Forum. Today we're very excited to share some innovations being worked on by some of our state departments of education. And if we take ourselves to the next slide, Amanda. We're very excited to have Lisa Harney with us from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And she's going to be sharing with us some really exciting work they're doing about creating a sequence of college and career readiness activities and experiences that spans grades 9 through 12. And then we have Graham Wood and Cassie Palsgrove from the Ohio State Department of Education. And they're going to be talking about some exciting work they're doing there on what they're calling simultaneous credit, or being able to get 2 credits when in a course when you meet the standards for 2 different subjects. Also a very exciting development that has a lot of potential. Unfortunately, our third participant today, Lisa French from the Louisiana Department of Education, had some unforeseen circumstances and won't be able to join us today, but we're going to bring her back as soon as she and we are able. We have a slightly new feature today. We're going to try some breakout groups. So after we've heard from our 2 presenters, you'll be able to choose which one you'd like to learn more about and join that breakout group for some more in-depth discussion and sharing of maybe some things you're doing similar in these areas. All right, take us to the next slide, Amanda. As usual, we have a wide range of folks on today, and that should lead to some rich discussion. We're really asking you to use the chat function to share ideas, to pose questions, to share resources, to share ways you might be doing a similar thing in a different way in your locale. Just a way to have a rich dialogue as we go along through our presentations today. And as always, we will send everybody the resources afterwards, the recording, all the materials that are shared today. So you'll have that to look at in detail over time, because I think you're going to want to with some of the stuff we're sharing today. Just a quick frame on our presentation today. Building pathways to adult success for all our students has never been so crucial, right? We know it was a challenge to begin with. This idea that all our students have to have a strong destination after high school that leads to a family supporting wage, which would mean some additional schooling or training. And we really have to organize K-12 to help make those pathways happen, to give kids exposure and experience with them so they can make informed choices, to build connections between K-12 and higher ed and training so those pathways are much more seamless than they are. And, as with everything, the pandemic has heightened that, right? And it's disrupting many of the traditional guidance and support systems our students have counted on. We know high schools in general are sort of the last ones, right, to get back to even hybrid schooling, let alone full face-to-face schooling. And that's caused a lot of disruption. And then on top of it, if you think about next year, and I know we don't really want to do that yet, but if we do, it's going to be a very unique year, right? Think about like the kids' experience, right? We're going to have 9th graders coming into high schools who maybe had a very limited 8th grade experience. So their transition to 9th grade is maybe more challenging. We'll have 10th graders that didn't really get a 9th grade experience. So almost have 2 9th grade classes at once. We'll have 12th graders who may come back and maybe a few credits shy because they couldn't quite get all their credits in a remote setting and have a very short window to obtain those credits to graduate on time. We'll have 11th graders who are going to wake up and suddenly being asked, well, what do you want to do with your life? When the last thing they knew, they were just in 9th grade trying to figure out how to find their way around the building. So every single grade you can see is going to have unique challenges next year to keep kids on the pathways to adult success. And actually, we're going to have our next session is going to really focus on that and thinking about how we can use some of our emerging on-track systems and maybe extend them to all kids. Because almost every kid is going to have to be progress monitored next year in a different way to make sure they all stay on these pathways and don't get derailed. So we really need to build on existing innovations. And that's why we're really exciting to share, because many of our states and many of our districts have continued to innovate through the pandemic and before, and have really solid solutions that are just not well known yet. And so That's why we're really happy to bring 2 of those here today. And we want to hear from you on your innovations, so we can keep sharing them as well, because it's the only way to do it, is we've got to connect with each other and share all that we have, so we're ready for what's coming. And then the last bit of really good news, right, is we have a brand new Secretary of Education. He was confirmed yesterday. And he has a focus on college and career pathways and really the equality of both. So that, I think, really puts us in good stead for some much more inventive and supportive federal action in the years to come than we've experienced most recently. So with that, I want to bring our first presenter on, Lisa Harney. Let's go to our next slide. Actually, one more. And she's going to talk about the Massachusetts College Career and Civic Readiness and the My Career and Academic Plan. Lisa, let's turn it. Welcome.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. It's quite exciting, although somewhat intimidating, but I'm really happy to be able to do this. So thanks. And I want to talk, Amanda, thanks. In 2016, there were 2 significant pieces of work in Massachusetts that kind of came to fruition. The first being that our Board of Elementary and Secondary Education and our Board of Higher Education came together and created a definition of college, career, and civic readiness. And recognizing that now it's a 3-page definition in reality, but our little synopsis here is that readiness really means that an individual gains the requisite knowledge, skills, and experiences in 3 domains. And I think this is a key piece of college, career, and civic readiness, is that all 3 of these domains must be attended to for our students. So there's academics, the learning that happens there, workplace readiness, and the personal social development, often seen as SEL in most of our schools these days. Next slide, Amanda. The second piece that was going on was that there was a legislative report. Prior to this report, we had been working, we had begun looking at ILPs, individual learning plans. We had begun doing demonstrations and some PD with schools. But this report coming from the legislature really put some meat into this endeavor, because this report recognized that nationally, individual learning plans are really used for, it's a key strategy for engagement. Engaging in those career pathways that Bob was just referring to, helping students see a full scope of learning that will happen in the pathway, selecting rigorous high school courses, aligning them to that pathway, and then being engaged in their own post-secondary planning. I think that we've learned that these plans really help students have voice and choice in what happens in their futures. So the report included 4 recommendations for our development: building the capacity for implementation, establishing a no-cost college and career planning portal. I'll talk about that in a minute. Create and expand professional development opportunities. We created a 3-workshop PD series that we have implemented the past 3 years. We've had almost 200 schools take advantage of that planning as they've started their work in what we call NICAP. Because as you can see, the 4th bullet was that we should develop a new naming convention. There was thoughts that ILP was often confused with IEP for our special education students. So there was a recommendation for that. So if you go to the next slide, Amanda, we took number 4 first, and we went and we created My Career and Academic Plan. And this plan is really twofold. It's a process that needs an instrument. And so that college, that portal that I mentioned earlier is the instrument, and it's an online. Oh, sorry, did I just mute myself by accident? So it's an online portal that it's a career information system. Many of you may know Naviance or Zello, the CIS system. And then here in Massachusetts, we have a free portal called MIFA Pathways. And MIFA Pathways is great for our schools, because MIFA has been aligning, as they have created this portal, they have been working with us with our system of MyCaps so that the portal is very responsive to our development. In this portal, the results of students' personal interests, career interests, course taking, planning, everything for a student. It should be this holistic holder of the student's education from grades 9 through 12. The process is the key piece, enables students to define their career and life goals. We want based on their interests. Again, student-driven with MyCap, student-driven, student choice, student part of the planning process. And so we want it to be based on their interests, skills, and values. The process needs to facilitate the student's ability to align their courses with their career interests. And that's where that whole pathway piece comes in, right? We want our students not to say, I'm interested in this, so I'll take this course. We want our students to be identifying pathways where the course selections will match with their progression through the high school. The process should assist students with identification of that post-secondary pathway. What do they need once they discover an interest? What are they going to need to get there after high school? How do they best prepare for that? And really key is a big piece. We all know the research that says every student needs a caring adult. And this process should always make sure that every student does have someone in the school that's going to help keep them on track and moving forward with their planning. We go back to those, if you can, next slide, Amanda. We go back to those 3 domains for college, career, and civic readiness. I think we talk mostly about, and hopefully most folks are aware of CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, that identifies 5 domains. And a lot of SEL programs, First Steps and PBIS, and a lot of our programs identify these domains. But these domains, we have to keep in mind, are not just about in school for students, right? It's not about developing their skills so they can be successful in school. These are their life skills. These are the same skills that they're going to need in the workplace. They're going to know how to have healthy relationships. They'll be responsible for making some decisions in their jobs. And so these are skills that are really life skills for those students. The career development in the graphic that I had shown you, we called out workplace readiness. We actually talk about career development education because throughout high school, the students should be really involved in a sequence of activities that become progressively deeper and more intense as the students gain the skills and maturity and the knowledge of where they're going or what they're interested in. So we talk about career awareness, career exploration, and career immersion. And we want our students to have the awareness, which, a career fair that we often see many of our students attending to. But the next level would be, let's look at the labor market. Do our students know what's hot in their area? Do they know what's the job availability is in the area of interest? So going deeper with that through exploration, and then immersion, where we really try and put these students into work-based learning experiences. So there's internships or apprenticeships. Maybe there's a capstone project in their senior year, but making sure the students have had the spectrum of career development by the time they're leaving school. And in end of the academic domain, in Massachusetts, we have what we call Mass Core, which is a rigorous course of study that is aligned to the entrance requirements of our state universities and colleges. So key in that is not just, English, math, science, which they need to have, number of units every year, each content area, but also that they be thinking about advanced placement, that there are AP courses available, that they have an opportunity to take early college courses or be in an early college pathway, making sure that academic program is rigorous and realistic for each student. If you could go to the next slide, Amanda. So trying to put these 2 things together, this is a simplistic demonstration of our framework, but using the 3 domains, And then identifying learning objectives. So what do we want our students to know and be able to do in each grade in high school in each of these domains? So these 3 domains, it's not that we don't want folks to say, oh, I'll do personal social this year and we'll worry about the career next year. That in every year in high school, all 3 domains, we're identifying what we want our students to know and be able to do. Then we answer, well, how will that happen? We identify units, lessons, activities, and places where that can happen in the school. Because this does not have to be a counselor only, driven by counselors. This should be a whole school endeavor. So the learning should happen across the school. And then MyCap artifacts. As I said, that online planning portal tool, the student creates an account, and then there's plenty of opportunity for them to either upload or to engage in the search engines that those portals all have, to research schools, to research colleges, to do comparisons, to identify jobs, and all of that, create a resume, all done within those portals. And so it's an important thing to identify, what do we expect to see in there? Because we know our students, sometimes they don't remember exactly what they have learned, but it's great that they can go back and look. They can go and see their resume. They can change their goals. They can do that in that portal and always have in front of them their learning and their documentation for that. So if you go to the next slide, this is what our current framework looks like. This is our grade 9. And as I said, this is our state framework with each of those domains in an objective or 2 or 3 in each domain, with some resources, some strategies, and then what we would hope to see in the students' MyCap. Keeping in mind that MyCap in Massachusetts is not mandated. So we work really hard to encourage our schools to see this as the true engagement tool that it can be for our students. And I think there's one more slide. And as I said, that framework we have 9 through 12, and we currently have a 20-member advisory group of middle school educators who are in the process of creating the framework for grades 6 to 8. So our intention by the end of the school year is that we actually will have a 6 to 12 MyCap framework for the state. And so CCCR is really driven by the implementation of that framework, by identifying learning objectives, making sure we meet all of the needs in each of those 3 domains. And MyCap becomes the process and the instrument that directs and documents that learning and the achievements that students have in order to ensure that they're post-secondary ready. And so a couple of the best practices is that this is a whole school program, but implementation, especially in current circumstances, can be difficult. So we certainly support and recommend a pilot. Maybe begin with grade 9. Maybe you start with just your grade 9 students, and each year you add on the process to each grade. The scope and sequence, I can't stress enough that this needs to be created by a team that has to represent varied roles across the school. Again, if it's only done with counselors, it will be a counselor program, right? And we don't want that to be. This needs to be a student program driven by the student with support from everybody in the school. So we encourage teams that include an administrator, a general ed teacher, a counselor, obviously, a general ed teacher, special ed teacher, EL teacher. We had one team, a couple teams actually, that brought a nurse to be part of the discussion to help see and determine where best all of these activities can happen. So we know counselors may lead, but it is going to happen in a variety of ways, in a variety of settings. There could be a core content lesson that relates to career development, and we want to make sure that gets called out. Advisory programs are often a place where this can happen. Project-based learning activities. because I think what's really important to remember is that these three domains blend. Although you kind of create this framework, recognizing that that each domain is separate, it's important to recognize that that domain will influence the others, right? So that when students do self-identification and self-interest, that's going to affect their career development choices and their career development interests. The courses they take, hopefully they'll see the relationship to their career choices. So these domains blend, but it's important to call out the activities for each of those. So project-based learning activities are a great place to see some of that happen. And then in this era of COVID and online and remote learning, it's really important to identify activities that students can do on their own. And students can be active in their planning and their development, whether they're in school or not. And of course, the bottom line being that all students should definitely be participating. So by adhering to the three domains and using the process and instrument, we believe that our students are exhibiting voice and choice in their planning and have an opportunity for that. We're encouraging them to be active drivers of their own planning, to own their futures, and ultimately to be more prepared for their post-secondary success. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was wonderful. Thank you. We got a couple things in the chat we'll get to quickly, and then folks, if you have ideas to share, please put them there. And also, we have breakout groups coming. You can join Lisa's breakout group to get more detail. Just two quick things, Lisa, that come to my mind is that one, what I think is powerful about this is that some of the earlier versions of sort of individual guidance plans were very much like individual journeys that a student would sort of mark their journeys, but it'd be very individualistic and it could be quite varied student to student. What strikes me about this is you're trying to create a set of universal experiences, but allow for both school and student choice within them. But you are trying to map out and ask schools to map out a sequence of universal activities with the idea being that everybody experiences all of them, as opposed to some kids get some kids get other. And that is really a change of mindset to how we often traditionally have done guidance and even college and career experiences. So I think that's quite a powerful breakthrough. And then the one question I had is that in that career development education, in that sequence of sort of exposure to experience to immersion, and recognizing you're trying to get all kids to participate, I wonder if schools are, and I know it's complicated by COVID, and this is just getting launched in many ways during COVID, but I'm wondering if schools are going to think of inventive ways to create enough of those for all kids, right?
I have to say that the people that I've been talking to, and some of the folks that have been involved in this planning are definitely thinking for all students and trying to find the avenues for that. I think Pathways makes it really, really attainable. If we start developing that in Massachusetts, we have 2 pathways that we provide designation for. So the folks go through really a rigorous application to be designated either an early college pathway or an innovation pathway, which means partnerships with those other institutions. So an innovation pathway has a school has a partnership with a business or an organization in their local area, which guarantees students in that pathway will have those experiences when the time comes. Part of that pathway is there has to be a 100-hour work-based learning experience for the students. So I think as we further develop pathways and we have this MyCap process,
Gotcha.
We're going to find better ways to have things available for students.
Gotcha, excellent. One comment in the chat, and then we'll go, is that Cliff asked, are students part of the planning team, or could they be?
My boss, that's my boss. And yes, Cliff, I'm sorry, we don't, I guess I haven't been vocal about that, and we need to put that in, but we would encourage every school to have a student or 2. Usually they join things better in pairs. So I always say you need 2 students, not 1. to be there, to be part of the process. I think it's key. I'm not sure many schools, to my knowledge, have not done that yet, but I think that's a really important piece for them to be doing that, to be including kids. Again, student voice and choice, right?
Great, thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
And you set us up perfectly for our segue to our friends now from the great state of Ohio. Because one of the things that this idea of giving all kids these enriched career development and college experiential experiences take time and often have to do well, have to actually happen during the school day. And where are we going to get all this time when all we're doing is chasing credits to graduate? And the fascinating thing here is that think how much has changed in education, over time. But one thing that stayed the same over 100 years is we have Carnegie credits, and it says you have to have so many credits of a certain type, or you don't graduate and you can't proceed to become an adult. And what's really exciting about some of the work that's being done in Ohio that Graham and Cassie are going to dive into now is they're thinking of ways that we can still demonstrate the knowledge that those credits we're trying to get at, but do so in ways that creates time so we can do a lot of this experiential learning. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Graham and Cassie.
And I'm going to kick us off, and then Graham's going to pick up and show you some really neat tools that we've developed around this concept. But, thanks to the Johns Hopkins team for inviting us to share with you here today. We're pretty pumped about our work around innovating credit, and Bob's exactly right, like thinking differently about the Carnegie unit. And we want to share with you just a few of the tools that Ohio has in place that we're working with school districts to implement that allows for that innovation to happen. And so we're going to focus on one piece of policy around simultaneous credit, but you'll hear that we're going to weave in some other things that we've been working on too. Something that's really important, we've spent some time as an agency rallying the state around a strategic plan for education. And so what that did was created conditions for people to get excited about the prospect of change. So one snippet that we wanted to share with you today is our strategic plan for education is called Each Child, Our Future. And it calls for a student-centered system that addresses the needs of an increasingly diverse student population and specifically calls out the need for preparing students for a rapidly changing workforce. And so what that process of developing the strategic plan, was an all call for Ohioans to come and participate in small groups to kind of share what that really mattered to them in the system of education that we were providing. And so this is really what Each Child, Our Future is all about. Now we know that's big picture. So how do you operationalize something like that? And so one of the ways in which we operationalize it is through some of these innovative credit options in Ohio. And so those of you that may have an opportunity to work with your state legislature on, developing some language that might exist in your rule, we wanted to make sure you had connections to which what the verbiage was around our Ohio law that enables both credit flexibility and then simultaneous credit. So I mentioned credit flexibility because it is the way that our state kind of gives schools permission to use competency-based demonstrations of learning versus seat time. So when we talk about the Carnegie unit in and of itself, this credit flexibility law allows for schools to think in terms of competency-based demonstrations to award credit versus seat time and instruction. And so that particular language really kind of opens the door for us to get creative in how credit is determined at the local level. So we're going to focus today around simultaneous credit because like Bob said, it really opens the door for a little bit more time in a student's day. And so really simultaneous credit allows for schools to integrate content standards from multiple subject areas into a single course credit. So think of social studies and English. Well, simultaneous credit blends those two together so that a student can receive credit in both content areas for maybe one class period if developed appropriately and correctly and aligns to those content standards that each of those credits are expecting of those students. So it really is taking two content areas and providing the latitude for a school to issue credit for, one course, but you're getting 2 credits for it. Those of you that are familiar with career technical education, I'm sure many of you know, many of your pathways are traditionally receive an academic type credit and an elective technical type credit. And so this concept is not necessarily new, but it's something that we want to make sure is promoted, with a sense of urgency to all of our schools and thinking about how we might open up time in a school schedule. We also, our partners in Massachusetts also mentioned this idea of project-based learning. And so we're really trying to use project-based learning as an impetus for schools to think bigger about, in project-based learning, naturally, you're kind of embedding standards across curriculum into one project. So how do you take that to the next level and integrate standards across 2 courses to equal multiple credits for one course? And so we have a pretty robust system of STEM schools in Ohio, which this is what they do all day. They integrate coursework, and students receive their traditional 20 units of high school credit to receive their high school diplomas. So we have a short video here for you to kind of paint in your mind how we're promoting this with school districts. We also kind of took 2 seemingly unrelated fields to talk about with schools at a high level, how these seemingly unrelated fields could be operationalized to issue credit in both areas. So Amanda, if you don't mind hitting play for us, that'd be great.
Collaborating with other teachers I find super beneficial because there are too many times where students have disconnects to like real world applications or other class. And so I look at something that I've learned, like a kid has learned in math class, they've learned some algebra, and then they come and do an equation or they graph in science class and they're like, oh, this is how it works? That didn't make sense to me before. And I think part of that is when we collaborate with other content areas, it becomes more authentic. Kids realize like, hey, this matters not only in science class, but in government or in math, or maybe in my my chemistry or physics class as well. And it makes all those connections, and it becomes, they get a lot of reinforcement through varying teachers as well, or we can kind of use each teacher's forte as well. Well, one teacher might be better at explaining things, another teacher might be better at showing, or maybe generating ideas of how to fix problems is when the kids are troubleshooting, trying to brainstorm and make solutions for their issues that they're having with their project. But I think a lot of it too is realizing that life isn't categorized into 5 or 4 different subjects. Life is, you go from one idea to the next idea to the next idea, where everything intertwines, And so I think if we can teach kids that now, when they get into life, they're ready. So if they're applying for a job, they're using their science knowledge that they have. They might be using their math knowledge and finance and all of that as well. They're also using their employability skills. Maybe they're using their government things. They got to understand what background checks are and that sort of thing. And so it comes around full circle and becomes a real world situation that they're starting to learn about now rather than later in life.
I'm Jennifer, and I teach plant and animal biotechnology and ag, food, and natural resources.
I'm Chris, and I teach government.
And I'm Anton, and I teach plant and animal biotechnology as well.
Project Terra is a project that explains how food goes from farm to table.
So essentially what we did was we took the idea of a marble run, with the ramps and the gears and all those different things, and decided we would start with food at the top and then work our way all the way down to waste at the bottom and all the different facets in between, including government regulation.
Yeah, we wanted to try to make an example of this through the marble run. And then when we came up with this idea, we looked back and saw what sort of standards fit into this, which in plant and animal biotechnology, it's a huge strand through the whole course. And then as we partnered with Chris in the government class, as we brainstormed this and decided to work together, we realized there was a ton of government standards when we talk about food regulation and lobbying and all sorts of government agencies that work along with food industry in order to make those connections.
So in collaborating with Career Tech, we can do a lot of things that we traditionally couldn't do inside a government classroom. Typically, government is just kind of content delivery and listening.
This isn't your normal government class.
So instead, what we can do is we can build things out of wood, as simple as that sounds, or weld things, or watch marbles go down, or whatever. And also, obviously, we can bring in a lot of science and a lot of things we don't typically talk about in schools, like food. Like there's something very interesting about knowing that how fast food industry works, for example, is obviously incredibly important to government regulation. It's not just the FDA. The FDA does everything. So it's very interesting to look and see how everything kind of connects together in one seamless class.
So, when we're working with schools about this concept of integrating coursework to result in simultaneous credit, we really try to focus on this idea of, start with a project and integrate across curriculum for one project and kind of see how it goes, because that is a key that unlocks the door for, educators to be thinking critically about where there's overlap or complementary curriculum that can be taught to free up time in a student's schedule. I mean, if a student has a separate agriculture course and a separate government course, and now, you're kind of blending that curriculum to offer those 2 credits in one course, either later on in their high school career or even later on in their day, it's gonna open up time for them to go experience an internship, earn an industry recognized credential, all the things that we aspire for our high school students and even earlier on to be able to do. So we've included a link here for you for the guidance to schools that we've drafted. Often some of the barriers that we hear are, well, I don't know how to code this in our information management system to make sure we're going to receive our school funding, which are all legitimate concerns. So we really tried to develop a comprehensive guide around teacher licensure, reporting guidelines, and this may help you when you're thinking about how you might be able to bring this to your state. One thing that everyone is always concerned about is the validity of the credit and how it applies to a student's graduation pathway. And so we're always very clear about, credit is a local decision in the state of Ohio. So, when a school district has determined that a curriculum meets the standards requirements, they get to determine that credit is what, satisfies for that student's graduation pathway. And we have some rigorous graduation requirements in the state of Ohio. So if anyone's interested in talking more about the intersection between credits and graduation, we'd be happy to do that too. So at this time, we want to show you a tool that we've developed and spent a lot of time with our career tech and our academic teachers thinking about. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Graham Wood.
Yeah, thank you, Cassie, and appreciate, all of that context there. And I also appreciate you kind of identifying some of the potential, fears and some pushback that teachers have. And another one of those that we heard a lot as we're thinking about this idea is, okay, well, I know my content. I'm not sure that I know somebody else's content and how it relates to mine. If I'm an academic teacher in the classroom, how am I supposed to know exactly what's involved in, the agriculture standards or the manufacturing standards? And that can be a scary idea. So we developed a tool that could hopefully help folks, quell that fear and start to understand how their content connects to other subjects throughout Ohio. So what we did is we spent some time before we even started building a tool, aligning standards. So we brought pairs of career technical education and academic teachers together in a room, and we sat them down and had them look at their standards side by side. And we had them analyze and see where there were connections between these two things. So they looked and saw that, these two standards may be saying the exact same thing. We've got two standards that are almost, perfectly alike, or one is really a real world application of the theory of another standard. So we also had them, as they're aligning these standards, rate them so that we know if something was an application or if it's just a reinforcement where these two things are exactly the same. And we took this huge database of information where we made these connections, and we took massive 50,000 row Excel documents and handed them off to some developers and said, hey, we'd really like this to be a useful tool for schools and districts to be able to search within these, to be able to analyze and figure out, where these connections are, and to be able to take these connections and get some reports that would help them to, one, maybe think about how they could align a lesson. That's a starting point to dip your toe in the water. Say, all right, I want to work with the teacher across the hallway or across the building or across the district to say, I want to align this lesson. But a lesson can just be the start. It can be a lesson and then it grows into a unit. or maybe folks are willing to, you know, dive off the high dive into the deep end and align 2 courses for what Cassie's talking about of simultaneous credit. So we spent quite a bit of time developing this, and I'm incredibly impressed with the tool that we've been able to come out with. So what it does is, and this is just an example of an alignment that would come as an output of this tool, is it shows where one set of standards connects to another. So here on the screen, you see where one of our science standards, energy resources in our environmental standards, aligns to some agriculture and environmental system standards. So you're seeing that energy resources connects directly to fossil fuel, connects directly to renewable energy, alternative energy and technology. There are some direct connections there, and you'll see that there's that rating just to the left of that agriculture competency where it says that little blue R. That's a reinforcement. So it means that these standards are saying basically the same thing. So we have made this tool public. It is out in the world for Ohio educators. And we are trying to do our best to go and spread the word and get folks to come and play around, because we're hoping that this can be a great tool for starting to get folks you know, in the world of, you know, integrating coursework and eventually into providing simultaneous credit. So at this time, it does just connect our career tech standards to our academic standards, but we're hoping, you know, as this tool becomes more and more popular, to continue to expand these alignments and to think through even more uses and broader applications of this tool. We'd love in our breakout room, we can definitely give you a little you know, run through of what the actual tool looks like if you're interested. So.
Yep, so we want to give anybody an opportunity to ask questions. So if anyone has questions, we're happy to answer them. We also, are looking forward to the breakout room, and we're kind of curious how these types of opportunities are operationalized in your state, and then can do a run through of the standards by design in the breakout if you're interested.
Thank you so much, Cassie and Graham. I think what's really powerful about this, right, is that you've been able to take it from a law to effective guidance to a useful tool. And it takes all those, right? We know to actually get to implementation. I'm just a little bit curious. I know we have to go to the breakout room really soon, but when you share this idea out and you get reception, what is people's still biggest hesitancy when they're like, it sounds great, but what do they say with the but?
And I'll be curious Graham's thought on this. You know, it really does come down to the fear. Am I allowed to do that? I don't know anyone else doing that, right? So I don't think schools are comfortable in their own skin of owning the fact that they get to determine the credit. I think they're so concerned, justifiably, about being the barrier to their student graduating high school that they'd rather do it the way they know is the way to do it. So it's really well, you know, how do I code that to make sure I'm allowed to do that? It's that fear.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, all right, with that, I'm gonna turn it to Amanda to let us get to breakout rooms.
Hi everyone, so we're gonna do something new. We're gonna open up and let you guys choose which breakout room you'd like to go to. They'll either be, as you can see on the slide, labeled college or credit. College will be with Lisa Harney from the Massachusetts Department of Education, and then credit will be with Graham and Cassie. All right, and so we'll give you roughly, looks like about 10 minutes in there to discuss, ask questions, sort of have a roundtable thing before coming back, and we'll kind of share some of our thoughts and learnings from that time. All right, welcome back, everyone. Would anyone like to share? Feel free to unmute yourself. Or if you're not comfortable doing that, you're welcome to share in the chat.
I can say in our breakout, in my breakout, you know, there were questions about kind of the trainings and how are we getting people to come, especially without a mandate. That's really difficult. But I believe prior to COVID, and now especially with COVID, keeping students engaged has been raised to an uber level, right? And so people are now seeing that this is the kind of tool that we need to bring in to help our kids. We also talked a little bit about our middle school, because I find the middle school people that are putting together, helping to inform our 6 to 8 framework. I find them so excited about this work and so excited to be part of creating a framework, because they've already bought into the need for career development for kids at the middle school. They've already bought in with that, and most are doing something there. They love the idea of putting together a whole framework of that.
Yeah, and our breakout room. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say thank you, Lisa, but yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, our breakout room had some great conversation, and I think what we learned is that other states may not have as open of policy as we do here in Ohio for allowing this kind of simultaneous credit, but that folks are very interested in. The point was made that, you know, the learning loss from COVID may be a strong impetus to allow for this, especially as we think about how much extended time students might need in certain areas. But had some great questions, and looking forward to hearing from folks about what they find in their policies for their states.
We had a comment in the chat from Shanitra. I guess this is kind of in response to what Lisa just said. I like that attention is being paid to middle school, and that in some states, students are picking their career paths in 8th grade.
Yeah, in Massachusetts, we have, you know, career vocational technical schools, and students, it's an application process. So students in 8th grade have to choose, you know, if they're going to apply to that, choose that type of education versus the traditional school.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to share? Or maybe additional questions for the group that you weren't in? Okay, with that, I want to go ahead, and we have a few other things just wrapping up. We have a couple events. We have a supporting students during the pandemic and beyond, the case for a core for student success, and that's next Tuesday at 2 p.m. that we invite you to join us. The links will for registration will end up in the chat, and we'll also send everything out. Additionally, our next Pathways to Adult Success Solution Forum is on April 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and that will also come out as well. That will be extending on-track supports to all secondary students in the 21-22 school year. And with that, I want to thank you, be well and onward. Thank you for joining us today.